Szanowni Państwo.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome. My name is Łukasz Mordarski, and we'll be speaking about Ukraine, about war and war perceived by reporters. Gabriela Jatkowska, a journalist that specialized in criminal affairs, the author of documentaries and films. Starting June 2022, she's been to Ukraine's war line, documenting what is happening there, Russians, Ukrainians. She has collaborated with Polish media. She was into programs on war. Very warm welcome. Marcin Nowak, for 20 years, has been working in media, radio information agency, Gazeta.pl, Rzeczpospolita.pl and Polish radio. After the start of the war, he started TVP Correspondent to Ukraine and the author of reportage on 7 Sins of Putin and Russian war crimes. Until 2024, he's been going to Ukraine on a regular basis, offering coverage on the situation on the front. And Luca Steinmann, many-time winner of awards, independent journalist, geopolitical analyst. He was working in different regions all over the world, including Ukraine, Russia, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Armenia, China, and Azerbaijan. His coverage was published in Italy, Switzerland, France, the USA, and many other countries. Starting February 2022, he's been one of few independent journalists covering from Ukraine parts controlled by Russia. A very warm welcome and good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, what is everyday life of a reporter who goes to war zone? What are the challenges for journalists covering conflicts on the first line? Gabriela will start with ladies. Ladies first. Everyday life is different for everybody, depending on what you have to do. Is it live? Or is this news report or something else? Or you are a witness, you record and register for future use and projects. What's the biggest challenge for me is to be there on time, to reach a hero before the hero is dead, to talk to that person, to record it. You don't think about yourself, about being comfortable. Danger is not what you think about. You think about being a witness. Like, you register people fighting because these people fighting are the most important. We had a chat yesterday and it was symptomatic that you had appointments with heroes who were not able to last until being interviewed. Some of them didn't, some of them were killed after recording an interview. You cannot make an appointment. You have planned to record it, but the war continues and sometimes you don't do it. We don't go to the places, to the actual places the soldiers find. The front is pretty extensive. It's not, it's not us sitting in the trenches recording once they are fighting. Let's not go into absurdity. Marcin, what was it like with you? Quite similar to what Gabriela is saying. Sometimes we go to the shooting positions with different military representatives, but it's like 30 minutes. We are very close to the shooting zone. Only then can we see them in operation. But it's like 30 minutes on the spot and then take us away to safer positions. What Gabriela said, speaking about the heroes that die, about you not thinking about your safety, it's the basis of a war correspondent. The first thing you forget about is your own safety. You need to reconcile with this fact before you start. You talk to yourself saying, I may not return. Many correspondents make their last will before leaving, or they update it. And that's the way it is. This is how you work. It's important to understand the pressure that we suffer there. Luca, your experience is rich. You've been to a plethora of countries. You covered many conflicts from many countries. What is your perspective? What is your take on Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much for having me here. I think that my experience in Ukraine was and is very, very interesting because my daily life was kind of a different compared to the one of many other war correspondents in that country, because I was reporting from the areas controlled by Russia, from the areas occupied by Russia. And this was obviously a unique chance as a reporter, but at the same time a dangerous position, not only physical dangerous position, but the dangers could come from my relationships with the Russian officers, with the Russian army controlling the area, and at the same time I had every day to defend my credibility towards the audience in the West, in the countries where I write for, like to show them that I was there, like to be really trying to be really independent and that I didn't have any kind of political affiliation. So my goal was not to fight with media for Russia and not even against the Russia, like try to defend my independence. It was not always easy, but I had a great luck, first of all. The first days of war where I was there were really, really chaotic. I arrived there on February 18th in the city of Donetsk, going through Russia. And on the 18th February 2024, on the 19th, Russians ordered to close the borders of what was back then called the Republic of Donetsk, so the pro-Russian republic there, separatist republic there. And so I realized that my position was unique, and I just stayed there almost 7 months. And the very beginning of the war was extremely chaotic because many soldiers there, Russian soldiers or like Ukrainian soldiers fighting for Russia, they didn't expect the war to happen in that way. And they didn't expect to find such a strong answer, military resistance from the other side. So back then, the city of Donetsk was mainly surrounded by Ukrainian positions, so Russians were attacking, and Ukrainians were firing back to the Russian positions and to the city of Donetsk, which was de facto the entire city was a front line. Like you needed to move, like in order to go to the real trenches, to the real front line, you needed to move from the city centers maximum 10 minutes by car, but shellings were coming every day. But in this chaotic situation, I think that was the best condition ever for a journalist, because in this chaos, in this uncertainty, I was really able to move freely around, to reach the trenches that were not geographically far away, and to try to make my report as good as I could, knowing, of course, that all my material was carefully read by Russian authorities every morning. You know, I was really realizing it. So, I decided, to stay there and just to have this mindset. Whatever I see, whatever I think it's correct, it's verified, that's gonna be published, you know. And it was not always easy. I had some trouble sometimes with Russian institutions, but at the very end I can say that I was able to do my independent job there, and I'm very happy for this.
Relacjonujecie wojnę z bliska.
You cover the war in a close-up, and I believe you do it the best possible way. You show what the actual situation is. But there are stories that you've seen, but they've never been published. They never go to the media. What kind of stories are they? Why are they so important? What are the key to understand the war? Gabriela? In more general terms, when full-scale war broke out, there was a ban to inform specific things, like what is happening in Polish society helping out Ukraine. and specific pathologies could not be described. You couldn't delve into it. More often, we also know there are many extremist groups in Ukraine, right-wing extremists. We didn't show them in order not to instill negative emotions. I have this possibility of collaborating with Belarusian and Russian people who are willing to fight to support Ukraine. These are right-wing extremists. Their bodies are covered with controversial tattoos, including swastika and SS symbols. At the same time, these are most courageous boys. Belarusians come to Ukraine on the second or third day after full-scale war was declared. They set up frequent military units. There are dozens of them now. I'd like to hear it out. Belarusians who are fighting on the Ukraine side. Yes, they support Ukraine. I have felt this responsibility ever since the beginning, because it was Belarus shooting rockets towards Ukraine. So we think the same. It's our obligation to inform about this. What I deal with now is the fact that Ukrainians promised citizenship to these Belarusians who have not received that yet. Remember, these people very often escaped from Belarus in 2022 during or after the protest as the result of the falsified presidential elections. They don't have their passports, IDs, or other documents, or these are outdated. So these people are now slaves of Ukrainian army. So they should have this freedom of finishing the contract, but the situation is different. You need to be delicate in order not to harm anybody. And I'm a proponent of showing the most brutal truth. Marcin, what was it like with you? Things that you didn't cover because you couldn't or you were not allowed to. As Gabriela said, the most sensitive ones, politically wise. So extremists. You need to understand, it's a war. There are good people and bad people in war on both sides of the front. We were trying to show this human story, civilian, humanitarian part, without delving into politics. Theoretically, we did all kinds of materials, but we tried to stick to those that we wanted to show to people. Suffering of civilians in the Ukrainian front. As Gabriela said, different things happen. So we were trying to show these things, bearing in mind Ukrainians' perception of our materials. Luca?
Well, in my case, I never witnessed any kind of censorship. I may have witnessed something different, which is self-censorship. Because sometimes, when you get a news that you know that it might not fit into the narrative of the government you're working in, this might happen under Russia, but in Syria and Afghanistan, whatever, you realize that you have a responsibility towards a correct information, so you have to give the news, but at the same time you have a responsibility towards your sources on the ground, who are those that live there, and once you will leave and you'll go back home, they will stay there and they can pay the consequences of your reporting. So I think a very important aspect of our job is to find a balance between the need of a correct information and the responsibility we have to take towards our sources on the ground. So, I try to make it in different methods. I sometimes change name of the people I interviewed with. I sometimes didn't give the location of some people. Like I remember, advancing with Russian troops in the areas of around Donetsk and Lugansk, and entering some villages where you were having they were completely destroyed. They were having maybe 10 or 20 people living there. A group of them, like generally, most of them were very old ladies or men. A group of them were cheering for Russia, praising them with bottles of vodka, and a group of them was telling them, "Go away, we don't want you, like you destroyed our village," you know. And of course, what would come out on Russian media would be just the first groups, you know. And so, like, what do you do with the second one? So I sometimes, not just in this case, you know, but maybe you change a name, you also give, let's say, some little fake details about their identity in order to protect them, but, you know, making their story going through, you know. So I think this is a real main challenge. And when it comes to concrete stories about this, let me report an aspect from the war in Ukraine that didn't come so much out on our media. This is the division within the people of Donbass, whose population is sometimes very divided between those who accepted Russians and those who are fighting against the Russians. And this is not a division based on ethnicity or language, but it's a division that you can find in families, you know, like all the reports, all the colleagues that were in 2014 there when the anti-Maidan movement started, they are reporting about the situation in which the population was basically divided, with a part supporting the separatists, a part supporting Ukrainians, and then a large silent majority, you know. And now, when you go there in different areas controlled by Russia, you can really feel this division. Some were more, some were less, but I know that some people don't agree with this, but I can really say, according to my experience, that this war in the Donbass is an international war, is like a war between Russia, Ukraine, and so on. But within some parts of the society, it's also a civil war between someone that decided to stand on the side of Russia for interest, for business, for convictions, for ideology, and someone that decided to stay on the side of Ukraine.
Yes, Luca was right in his saying it is not only Donbass. I made coverage from Kharkiv. It's worth understanding that I met an elderly lady whose daughter worked in Belgorod. Belgorod was the Russian city the closest to Kharkiv, where they shot ballistic missiles to Kharkiv. So if the mother called up the daughter, she asked, "Why are you shooting at us? Bombs are dropping at us." And the daughter had a different understanding of war, opposite to her mother's understanding. She said, "We are not bombarding you, we are liberating you." So there are stories like these. If we started speaking about emotions, there is huge emotional package. How to stay objective? Can we speak about 100% objectivism, 90%? Can you assess it this or that way? How to stay objective? How to keep journalistic ethos? Journalistic ethics or ethos, is this applicable to this kind of journalism? Because staying objective, if we were to be truly objective, we would have to present Russian side without any negative coloring. It is impossible. It's impossible for me. If you make a longish documentary, you return to your heroes, you meet them on numerous occasions, you stay in touch with them. This is not the war that you leave behind. You take the war back home because you retain contacts with your heroes. And these contacts are not typically journalistic. It is impossible. Returning from Ukraine on Friday, I didn't have a contact with one of my heroes, a young boy, who caused me very often to give negative emotions because he doesn't want to speak about this to his mother. So I was afraid I could get information that he might have been killed. He was in his position near Zaporozhye that was bombshelled. So the standards that we have in regular journalism, where you have to observe the standards, are different a bit here. What is also important, worth highlighting, is the fact that you cannot use war as a springboard for your career. Reaching heroes, photos, interviews, this cannot become a trampoline to make career, because you use people's death to create atmosphere, and there are people that do it. They color it up, they tell lies, they abuse these people to create their own career as a trampoline, as a springboard for professional reasons.
Mamy chyba dziennikarzy.
We are all familiar with the journalists taking selfies at the war front to make it look nice in Instagram. Marcin, objective approach, what is it like in such cases? Well, I won't add anything new. It's hard to remain objective when you are on one side of the front line bombshelled by another one, and you can lose your life because the other party started the invasion and started the war. In my opinion, the most important thing is to stick to facts, not adding anything, because it suffices in the places where we are to create a valuable topic, valuable footage. I think that in such extreme conditions, strong bonds are established. As Gabriela mentioned, the boy calls her from the front line to share what he feels. I'm also still in touch with people who stay in dangerous places, but fortunately are still alive, and you feel compassion, you feel their suffering, and naturally you try to help them the way you can without crossing the border of journalist criticism. Our protagonists are the topic of our material, but some journalists try to become the subject of their materials, just as you mentioned, selfie taken at the cemetery or at the tomb, just to show the scale of suffering. But when you do it for attention, and unfortunately some journalists, including Polish ones with whom I worked, treat this work as springboard for further career. It's attractive, unfortunately, because here we are like in a pro-Ukrainian bubble, anti-Putin bubble. But you might be aware that there is another side of the narrative. One of the pro-Russian parties, and definitely anti-Ukrainian parties, has 20-something% support in Poland. The people who are in Ukraine and now are telling bad things about the Ukrainians, they repeat the Kremlin propaganda combined with what they saw and they didn't talk about previously. There are extreme cases because it's the war, and sometimes the Ukrainians also want to take advantage of it at the expense of others. Such topics are extremely popular in right-wing podcasts or media, and you can build your career on it, just being a functional idiot, as we call it. So that's true. It's hard to remain objective. You need to have your ethics, your professional ethics. The very fact that you go there and you're ready to sacrifice your life. We know that 2 Ukrainian journalists died near Kramatorsk. I know that not as many journalists died there as in the Gaza Strip because it's a different type of conflict. In some places, it happens that when I was making footage in one place and 3 days later we had a journalist from French press who died on site exactly in the same place where I was. So you need to be lucky not to be killed. Now this is the place where the Russians occupied the territory near Bakhmut. When I was there, the fights were really severe in one district. If we are ready to go there to prepare footage rather than build our career, it means our ethics are strong. But if we go there to build our career, you know, the ethics is doubtful because you go there only to show your presence. The key thing is to show the everyday story, and it suffices. Then your objective. Luca, what about your footage? Only facts, or is it your personal assessment of the situation? What is the proportion?
Well, when it comes to me, especially in the war in Ukraine, I had no other chance to try to show only facts in order to defend my credibility towards Russian and towards the audience, as I was saying before. But even showing facts can be biased. I agree somehow with what the colleague said about the fact that it's very difficult, if not impossible, I think, in war journalism to be completely unbiased. Simple for the fact that you are on one side of the front line. So if you see the Ukrainian army bombarding towards Donetsk, it's not that you want to justify the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But these are facts, you know. So I think it's impossible to be very objective, but it is possible to try to be impartial. And I think that journalists should really say this, you know, like this is my biased view of the fact because I see this war from this corner, from this position. So I'm giving the voice also from people that are involved on the one side of the conflict, and you have to know that what I am telling you is a part of the reality, but I cannot pretend that is the reality as in its whole, you know? And I think there is another important point to be mentioned. This bias dimension in wars and in front lines can be concretely seen in how the propaganda structures of some regimes and also of some democracies are developing in recent years, you know. You are seeing that one of the most important challenge, most difficult challenge for journalists and war reporter is to access to some areas, to go to some parts, because the armies, the regimes, the soldiers on the ground select the like-minded journalists to be with them, to be embedded with them, and they allow them to report, transforming them somehow in their unofficial press officers, you know? And this is very evident, for instance, in Russia. Like, I was not the only foreigner from the beginning in the Donbas region. There were some other people that were, you know, more Telegram activists supporting Russia, like internationals and so on. And starting doing like this, then you get interviewed by the Russian television and so on, and reporting in a pro-Russian way. You start step by step to make a career into the Russian media system. Now I'm quoting the Russian system, but this is very evident in other kind of wars. You know, take the war in Gaza, for instance. Like, what is one of the main topic of discussions? The fact that no journalists have been allowed to enter the Gaza Strip to report. International journalists, I mean, no journalists that were outside, you know. And so the journalists inside are accused to be biased. Fair enough, it might be the case, it might not be the case, but we didn't have the possibility to go inside, you know. And indeed it was interesting to watch how Israel, for example, at one point, a few weeks ago, chose up a group, not of journalists, but of influencers, you know, like to follow them inside the Gaza Strip and to portray the situation as the Israelis were willing to do. So why I'm saying this, I don't want to take any position about this Gaza terrible war and so on, but I am unfortunately seeing that these methods of recruitment of journalists and of influencer is step by step coming as well in many of our democracies, you know, so from governments, from political parties, so selecting a journalist, pushing him to be biased and enabling him this way to make a career. And this perfectly matches with the will of many of some colleagues to become influencers. You know, you have a very quick access to generally to an audience like this, but we are giving up what I think is what has been the main strength of Western democracies, which is the possibilities of having an independent press.
Luca tutaj powiedział.
Luca has just mentioned that you go to the front line with a representative of the army. That's true if you go to the military positions, but sometimes, or even quite often, it happens that we go with humanitarian aid. It gives you more time, more opportunity to spend time at difficult positions, to spend time with people who can become a story. We always go to places where there are lots of people waiting for such humanitarian aid. They know there will be journalists there, and they also know they want to talk to us, not because of gratitude, but simply because they want to share some thoughts or opinions. So it's true, we were traveling quite illegally to such positions, and the Ukrainian army was stopping us. They were examining our cameras as we didn't have special permit from the army. I think it was just pure military bureaucracy, not because we wanted to show something we were not allowed to show, but such situations happened. When the full-scale war in Ukraine started, all the media, not only Polish ones, were reverberating it. We had like live broadcast on the Polish media, but as the conflict evolved, we were discussing it yesterday, the media do not inform about what is going on, how many people were injured, how many people were killed. We can have the impression that nobody cares about it now. In your opinion, how does the narrative change on the media as the conflict progresses? You rightly pointed out that it's like nobody cares any longer. It's partly true, and it's confirmed by how easily and how quickly we can get used to terrible things. The war has become an everyday thing. We pretend that it's not happening. We can see images of Ukrainians entertaining themselves in clubs. We've got Ukrainians who drive posh cars in Poland. Out of the will to help Ukrainian citizens at the beginning of the war, we changed our narrative and our position to shutting the door in front of Ukrainians because we hate them. I believe the Russian intelligence is doing pretty well in this respect and contributes to the situation. Our role is to remind people that the conflict is ongoing, changing, that it's becoming more and more terrible. Drones are now killing many soldiers. Sometimes it's not possible to reach the position or to exit the position because there is no other way. So it's like 50-50 whether they're going to leave the place safely or not. When we had the situation several weeks ago that drones entered Poland, the public opinions became again interested in the war. The media were informing about it, but it was like 2 or 3 days, and that was it. You are right. I believe Polish media and the authorities, the current and the previous ones, failed. Perhaps we failed as journalists as well. Or simply your audience is fed up with war. Certainly so. There is the psychological component of being tired with war. Believe me, the Ukrainians are also tired with the war. And they are tired every day as they cannot sleep at night because they are bomb-shelled. I do understand it. I stopped watching the war at a certain point in time, not because I was not interested, but it simply drained me, exhausted me emotionally, knowing that there were my friends there at the front line. We could see it when the pandemic struck. Initially, the media were informing about how many people were infected, how many died, and later on, a few weeks or months later, we didn't care. The same is true for this war happening behind our border. Right, you need to remember two things. I know they are not clickbaits and these are not popular topics, but we've got public media. I still work there. I believe that one of the public media components is a kind of mission. I can't think of a topic more important for the Polish raison d'etat now than the war in Ukraine. Apologies, but not. And there is a problem with finding good materials, good footage from Ukraine to be published, to be broadcasted on public television. If someone is interested, it's to a limited extent, and I believe that's a problem. First of all, because of the disinformation campaign carried out by the Kremlin services. It's anti-Ukrainian due to various historical or social reasons, and that's why it's so capturing for many. Showing the war as we have been showing it for 1 year, meaning drones in houses in Kiev, some arguments between Zelensky and Trump, Minister Sikorski visiting the sites. This is not the right way of presenting the war. It should be broadcasted, but in a separate space to make the viewer interested, if they're not interested in politics, and to show what's happening behind our border. We need to have human stories, and it's not done. We've got like half a correspondent in Kiev who needs to be there and show what's happening in the capital city. Typically, evening bomb shelling or political problems. This person won't go to the front line to interview the victims of war, as nobody is going to send him there. There is not enough. There are not enough resources to send the entire TV team for such footage. Why is it happening? No idea. I tried to get the answer from my superiors, and I still don't understand why this topic is over. I do understand that the current government and the current radio and television authorities want to show this conflict. They understand it's our raison d'etat, that this suffering can become our suffering, but they do not have a good idea to do it, or they do not have resources, or they are simply interested by some pragmatic aspects, namely the political aspect. Let's not talk about Ukraine, as some people can get furious and perhaps will win people's votes in the next election. The war has become political in Poland in this respect. Just to have the point of reference where in this map to place Polish media, I would like to ask the question to Luca. How does the narrative change on the international media when it comes to the conflict duration? I mean, what did it look like at the beginning and what does it look like now? Is the narrative the same like in Poland? Has it changed?
Well, I think it's a general tendency, the fact that there is a decreased interest for on-the-ground reporting from Ukraine in all Western Europe and in the United States. I think there are several reasons for this. The first one is that we kind of sadly got used to it, you know? And we are not seeing on the Ukrainian front lines any significant battle, you know. They're fighting for villages, they're fighting for houses, but the war is always on the same line, more or less. There is not a big battle for Mariupol, for Bakhmut, that is Pokrovsk. Okay, what is Pokrovsk compared to like? There's not the battle for Odessa, for Kiev, you know. So people hear of villages that they have never been hearing before, and so this is the first aspect. I think that our audience has the idea that it's always about the same. Second point, very important point, especially in Italy and in southern European countries, the war in Ukraine has been covered by the war in Gaza and all the Middle East. You know, Italy, Greece, their people, they don't feel Russia to be closed, you know, they don't feel so much Russia to be a threat, while they see that on the other shore, they have the impression that a big war is coming on the other shore of the Mediterranean, you know. Just to make it concretely, you know, the common people didn't see the refugees from Ukraine coming massively to Italy, but the common people saw the refugees coming from Syria, you know. So the direct impact of the war is the one from the war on the other side of the Mediterranean. And as a second point, I'm not sure how this is valid for Poland, but it might be the case. We are tending, like public opinions are tending to understand wars as a matter of internal policies, you know. So in Italy, for instance, we are speaking about the war in Ukraine not when it comes to the facts on the front line, but when it comes to the support to sending weapons to Ukraine. So this is a topic, and political parties are divided to it. So we are kind of using the war in Ukraine as a tool for the internal debate, or we are Italian politicians are divided between the standing of Trump towards Ukraine. Is it correct what Trump is doing or not? You know. So I think if in the very first months there was this emotional wave among many people, shocked to see Russia invading Ukraine, now everything turned into let's say, more banal domestic issues, and people are kind of not seeing an end of this war. There is not a shared goal on how to put an end to this war, so people just got used to it like seasons, you know.
Mówiliście przed chwilą, że
You were speaking about people are no longer being interested in stats. You need to show concrete human stories. So what kind of human stories do you remember most and why? Thematic scope. Russians and Belarusians fighting for Ukraine. I need to say that I'm most interested, this is what I want to show, stories related to Belarusians, because they are double victims. They are fighting like Ukrainians on Ukrainian grounds to liberate Ukraine, hoping that they will liberate Belarus, the country they cannot return to, because there's a death penalty pending if they are caught. There was this kind of situation. In one of the Asiatic countries, one of Ukrainians were expelled too by Belarusian commanders. And he was sent why? There was a personal conflict. They're quite similar to our country. This Belarusian opposition is divided. This person was expelled. He was transported to Belarus and he's being tortured brutally because he was fighting to support Ukraine. And he's in Belarusian prison. This is the danger looming in the air for them, for their families, brothers, sisters, mothers, spouses. They're interrogated. KGB invades their homes every now and again, searching homes, puts them in front of the cameras. Mothers have to repel their sons, saying that they shouldn't be fighting for Ukraine and free Belarus. The vision of free Ukraine, free Belarus is distant. At the beginning of the war, they're quite romantic. They would be winning with the Belarusian brethren. It was much bigger a dream. This fact that Ukrainians have not kept the promise, treating them in the worst possible way, and creating battalions or groups, special purpose ones. Russians are going to Belgorod, so the Russia's area. Ukraine has never confirmed it. They used Belarusians and Russians to do so. So this is the kind of activities. So this is the double tragedy. It's not only technicalities, but double aspects of human relations that are created during war. Marcin, what would you show to Polish public opinion so that they are again interested in war? There's been a multitude of such topics. It's a simple thing for a journalist, of course, put in inverted commas, because there is a topic to cover on every street. Every person has got their own stories, and they are touching stories, moving stories, poignant stories about suffering, so it's easy to do the coverage. We spent a lot of time in Kharkiv upon arrival, and we were avalanched with topics. Our friend said, look, there is ICT group that puts drones together. They bring them from China and they turn them from civilian drones into military one. So they used to write codes in the past, and now they have become a great military asset to defend the city. There's a concrete story from Orkiv. There was Ukrainian Easter time. We were the only international crew that went so close to the front line on the day that we knew that Russians would do something, and they did. They were bombing places near the front line. And Orkiv was supposed to be the startup of Ukrainian counteroffensive. Orkiv was bombarded so often, 300 shells a day. And locals were in this point of being steadfast. They had a Starlink, there was a school, and they offered us Easter cake. It was amazing. They can die every day, they are bomb-shelled every day, but they gave us so much upon greeting us. This made an impression. And this point was bombarded later on. And a few dozens of people were killed, so the story continued. So you need to show stories like these. Only then can you keep viewers attentive. Luca, what stories are in your head?
Well, in order to involve the audience following Ukraine, I would stack. I would give to people stories that can try to understand how the future can be, you know. And for instance, I would, in this case, go back to the Donbass because actually this is a region I know, but also to try to explain what people from there are thinking on the current situation and link to this, how many possibilities do you have for Ukraine to get back these areas or to lose them forever, as Putin is continuously requesting to Trump and to the United States. I think there are very few chances that these areas will go back to Ukraine in the near future. Also because the majority of the population that kept living there has somehow accepting living with Russians. Not also because they are Russian supporters, some of them are, but because they have been living de facto under Russian control and influence since 2014. So many of them developed business with Russians or business in Russia. Many of them have families in Russia, you know, and many of them identified in the Ukrainian shelling and in the Ukrainian bombardments the first source of danger for them, you know. And so if you go to Donetsk and Lugansk there, you will find a relevant, an atmosphere that we have to say, we can define it as pro-Russian or Russian-friendly. While this is another interesting point. If you go to southern Ukraine, in the parts of regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia, controlled, occupied by Russians, you will find a very other atmosphere. You have people there that are generally Russian speakers as much as those in the Donbas region, but most of them or many of them are not sympathizing with the Russians. I make a concrete example with this, you know, like one time I was driving with some Russian officers from Donbas to the area of Melitopol in the Zaporizhia region, and once arrived to that area, the Russians changed the car plates of their cars in order to have Ukrainian ones and not Russian ones, to avoid that local people might see them and communicate to the enemy army, so to the Ukrainian army, their position, you know. So you have there as well people working with Russians, but you have a different vibe compared to Donetsk and Lugansk. Why? I think the main reason is because they saw the destructions coming together with what the Russians were calling their liberations from Azov and from the far-right groups, you know. So I really witnessed, I wrote about this as well, of a fight one day in a square in Melitopol between one old communist pro-Russian man and a local lady originally from Belarus, that was saying, I mean, I'm Russian, I speak Russian, I don't even almost speak Ukrainian, you know, but now I became Ukrainian, you came and destroyed us, so like I don't want Russians to be here, you know. So I really think there is a difference of perception between within the people, between those living in the areas controlled by Russia from 2014 and those areas that were controlled by occupied starting from 2022. I think these are interesting stories to be told because this can also give a geopolitical perspective on the future. How concrete is the possibility of Ukraine to get back, for instance, Donetsk and Lugansk? I think it's very little.
What Luca said about people sympathizing with Russians and regions before war, they said that Kharkiv is the one. It was the part of regions, and Yanukovych was largely supported and won. Once Russians enter there, because it's only 30 kilometers away when it comes to borders, probably Russians would be greeted by the locals with flowers and vodka. It did not happen. Right before the invasion, there were strong protests before they started bomb shelling Kharkiv. These were pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russian protests. When Russian centers. There were fights in the center. These were special forces, irregular troops. Regular troops entered Sautivka, very famous district of the city in the north of it, and they were stopped instantaneously. Russians were not strong enough to win this second largest, biggest city in Ukraine, to keep it unoccupied, because you have a problem when you have to occupy it. It shows how much has changed in Ukrainian society ever since the beginning of this war. I agree with Luca. Kharkiv was punished by Putin because it was bomb-shelled all the time. Ballistic missiles were shooting at it. They fly 30 seconds from Belgorod. So you can imagine that if you start coverage live, this is what we never did, because if a Russian is watching television, they are watching television, we won't be able to finish, and they'll be able to shoot a number of missiles toward us. When a city was targeted with these missiles, and this continued for many years, it is totally pro-Ukrainian city. People are ashamed of speaking Russian, although most of the city inhabitants were Russian speakers, not Ukrainian speakers. And if you have an interview, if I wanted to talk to any of them, I used to learn Russian when I was at school. When I use a Russian word, I start speaking Ukrainian. I've learned it because I've been there long enough. I know which words not to use, but there's a slip of the tongue. This is a blunder in Kharkiv and many other cities. Odessa is a bit different. Odessa is a specific city. All these cities on this side of the Ukrainian front are pro-Ukrainian. Starting 2014, this one has been Russian occupied. You need to realize that the war started earlier than 2022 or 2014. If you live in Donetsk and you've got Ukrainian bombs hitting your city, it's not a surprise that they support Russians. Lugansk. Can you join it into Ukraine? We don't know. I was talking to Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting in Donbass. They say if any Ukrainian president gives away the terrains they have been fighting for, shedding their blood, they sacrifice their lives for, the first thing that they do when Donbass is officially given to Russia, they will come to Kiev and shoot the president on the spot, because they were dying in this conflict. They've been dying in this conflict for even years. Most probably this conflict will not finish, as it seems to us. It might be a frozen war. I'd like to say one more important thing. Let's not forget about Poles who live there. Polish society in Ukraine. And this help and humanitarian aspect, they helped a lot to children, families hiding in cellars, the children that are traumatized, they don't speak, they are hard on hearing, they are traumatized. There are Polish priests. They play a very important role, wonderful people. I'm not myself a believing person, a churchgoer. There's Father Wojtek from Kharkiv. He's a magnificent person. He organizes classes for Ukrainian children, all kind of support during Christmas and Easter. They visit his parishioners. Do you call them parishioners? He distributes packages, warm clothes. Yeah, Łukasz, you were asking the topics that you remember most. By the skin of the teeth, we could have been killed. Humanitarian aid was not delivered to Choroboczki. It was not in Kharkiv Oblast. It was the front line. At the end of the street, you could see Russians standing, and people didn't get any humanitarian aid. Sometimes people were smuggling bread. Ukrainian front line was outside the city, and Monsignor Wojtek was the first person to help them. And a guy from Switzerland that he harvested in his country. He was the first person to appear there to give humanitarian aid, because he heard from one parishioner in Kharkiv. His parents used to live in Korobochkino. It was hard. When we reached the place, 50% of homes were bomb-shelled, under siege. Artillery was pushing forward. So you can imagine how much they risk. And they don't want to make the front page news. They don't do it to show their faces. I was talking to Wojtek. He is a modest person. I'm not a believer, but if there were more Wojteks of this kind, I would become a believer myself. You need to remember it. During the war, you discover what is the best and what is the worst in humans. It's a cliché, but it's pretty adequate. And my appeal, Wojtek, Monsignor Wojtek is a true hero. Not the people who take 2 blankets and 3 sleeping bags to put it on social media, being interviewed, becoming heroes. It's not all about this. If we help, do it wisely. Let's help. But don't become a helping star. Do it to help other people, indeed, in real terms. And this is the punchline. We were supposed to give you microphone for questions, but we're talking too much. All speakers are available after the panel. Thank you very much. Gabriela Jatkowska, Marcin Nowak, Luca Steinmann. Thank you very much. My name is Łukasz Mordarski.
Do zgłoszeń, gotowi? Start!
Ja zgłoszę bibliotekę!
Ja, pierwszy basen w gminie.
Ja amfiteatr gra od naszej orkiestry. Wszystko w waszych rękach. Co powstanie dzięki wsparciu totalizatora sportowego w twojej okolicy? Zgłoś obiekt sportowy lub kulturalny. Wejdź na stronę gdygrasz.pl, bo gdy grasz, wszystko gra. Do zgłoszeń.
A network, and it's global. We work all around the world. We're based in the U.S. It's a network, that is to say, organizations that share common values: limited government, free enterprise, personal liberty, personal responsibility.
Atlas Network provides training and support to help build capacity, but most importantly, we give our partners the tools they need to be successful.
Telewizja Polska to więcej tego, co widzowie cenią najbardziej. Pasjonujące filmy i seriale, a w obsadzie najbardziej gorące nazwiska. Największe sportowe imprezy i momenty, które przejdą do historii. Bieżące wydarzenia, którymi żyje Polska i świat. Przebojowe koncerty, które łączą w zabawie wszystkich Polaków. Znakomite spektakle, które gromadzą rekordową publiczność. Telewizja Polska. Otwórz się na więcej. Telewizja.
Mam plan na bezpieczną firmę. To plan firmowy z cybertarczą, która blokuje zagrożenia w sieci.
Cyberbezpieczeństwo? Masz od tego Orange. Teraz cybertarcza za 0 zł we wszystkich planach firmowych, a w wybranych smartfony 50% taniej. Orange tu jest.
Mam plan na bezpieczną...
się lampka on air, to jest najlepszy moment.
Nie ma jednego instrumentu, który lubię najbardziej. To zawsze jest kontekst.
Uwielbiam sport bez obrazu właśnie z tej perspektywy, kiedy to ja mogę ten obraz kreować.
Pusty stadion nie jest cichy. Tam gołębie startują.
Jak ja bym chciała, żeby z mojego radia było słychać "będzie okej".
Ono może być cichutko w tle. Radio, które jest przyjacielem tego odbiorcy, przyjacielem człowieka.
Kiedy zapala się